It's time to address some issues that have recently surfaced in testing my aluminum 3-wing vertical axis wind turbine. It's been diligently spinning for several months now. A light whistle developed when the plywood parts began to delaminate during a particularly harsh winter. Today, we'll pull this VAWT apart and rebuild it. I'm Dennis. Thanks for watching. You can see how the plywood layers are beginning to pull apart or delaminate. We'll start with a couple of 1/4 inch 2 foot by 2 foot birch plywood squares. Next, we find the centers. Then, drill an 1/8 inch center hole. I like to use my compass to draw the path of my Dremel hole saw. These rotary tools make quick work of producing circular discs out of plywood. If this edge is going to hold up better in the weather, it needs to be fairly smooth and just a bit roughed up to soak up a lot of epoxy. Okay, we need to lay out the shaft connector. Here are the measurements: 30mm center hole, 80mm 120-degree bolt pattern. Drill out the bolt pattern. Draw 3 lines across the disc. Next, we will align the wing mounts with these lines. Using 2 wing mount sections, align them with the first line, mark the holes, skip a line, and repeat. Then, skip a line and repeat again. Now we'll drop a small screw in the middle hole. Place the other disc under. Make sure the screw aligns the 2 discs, clamp together, and drill the hole pattern from the last step. A light surface sanding. Here's where my last paint job failed. On the edges. This time I want to ensure that the wood is properly sealed, using marine grade epoxy and putting it on thick. This wood is thirsty. It drinks this epoxy up. You really have to work it in. At least 2 coats are needed for proper coverage. Don't forget your respirator. This stuff can't be good for your lungs. Okay, after 2 coats of epoxy, we need to drill the shaft connector holes. The large one in the center accommodates the shaft. The 3 smaller holes are for the mounting bolts. Needless to say, an electric hand drill makes this a lot easier. Now we'll get started on a couple of coats of epoxy on the back side of these discs, paying particular attention to sealing the newly drilled holes. I find rolling on epoxy to be very calming. Focused attention on a task can bring great reward. Building things is great fun. I love it. Alright, let's pull this thing apart. We'll start by removing the bolt in the shaft connector that retains the shaft bearing adapter. The STL file for this part and all 3D printed parts for this project are available at twirlything.com. The lower and upper shaft connectors are the same parts. They face the same direction on the shaft. The lower is projected inward while the upper projects outward. Here's a closer look. You can see the shaft connector is bolted to the shaft. You can also see my next project on the bench. It's a 4-wing hybrid Darius. The shaft connector STL file for 3D printing is available at twirlything.com. Okay, back to pulling this thing apart. The top deck is secured with wood screws. Screws hold tight to the 3D printed parts, and they're much easier to install than bolts. The most important connections are around the perimeter. Nuts and bolts help align the wings and ease assembly. Alright, we're ready to pull the top off. Let's look at the aluminum sheets and 3D printed parts used in this design. You can see here that the leading edges of the aluminum wings are folded over. This is for strength and safety. Again, wood screws are used to secure the aluminum wing to the 3D printed parts. All the 3D printed parts used in this design are available at twirlything.com. Now I'm going to do a demonstration as to how these wings are constructed. It's not part of this build, But let me show you how the 2mm version is constructed with PVC sheet and ABS to PVC glue. More on this in a subsequent video. Next, we'll look at the 1mm Savonius base. I've got a scrap piece of aluminum sheet from a previous project. The copper covering is pretty but very expensive. A sheet metal folding tool makes this easy. Flatten out a bit further with a smooth hammer. Both ends of the sheet need to be folded for strength and builder safety. This aluminum sheet can be quite a dangerous cutting hazard. Be careful. Now insert the aluminum sheet into the Savonius base part. It slides in quite easily. Don't force it. 2 sections of the Savonius base are needed for the top and 2 for the bottom of each wing. Now that the epoxy is dry, we'll start putting this VAWT back together. Make sure the hole patterns line up. Start filling holes. Bolt through from wing mount to deck. Bolt the perimeter first. This retains the wings in their proper place for further connections. An awl makes for easy alignment of the deck attachment holes and the wing mounts. Take your time, it'll all come together. I find that wood screws work well to combine the top deck to the wing mounts. The ASA holds strong. Continue around the deck, making all required attachments. Turning screws can be quite cathartic. Next, we're going to flip this thing over. The bottom is bolted. No wood screws. Notice the Loctite on the nuts. You don't want these nuts to fall off. Remember, this is the bottom. Okay, let's get rid of this old blue disc. I won't go back over the alignment and rebolting procedure for the bottom. The only difference on the bottom is we use all nuts and bolts, no wood screws. We insert the shaft assembly from the bottom and secure it with bolts. Next, we flip the unit and install the top shaft connector. Notice this end sticks out. Seat the shaft connector, then align it with the hole in the shaft. Insert the shaft bearing spacer, align the holes, bolt through and tighten. Next, insert the housing bolts and secure with nuts on the inside of the deck. Notice I put a piece of tape around the end of the bearing spacer. This provides for a snug fit later. Okay, let's set this onto an alternator. This alternator is store-bought. The connection is made with an adapter that I designed in Fusion 360. It's available at twirlything.com. Oh my, this really looks lovely. I think the epoxy will work much better. Upcoming videos include hybrid Darius build, wind charge controller, and my stability cage. Okay, talk to you soon.